Hi, welcome to Unsightly Opinions. My name's Tamara. Today we are going to be talking about the disability tax. This is a bit of a complicated video and is a true unsightly opinion, so bear that in mind as you go through. During this video, I'm going to be talking about prices in Canadian dollars. They might be slightly different where you are. This is the real world cost for me as a Canadian. This video came about because in passing, someone made a comment to me a few weeks ago about how wonderful it was and how nice it must be to get all those government tax breaks and to be able to get discounts when I go places. That got me a little bit fired up because there are many costs to having a disability, and any quote-unquote tax breaks or dispensations that I might get because of my disability do not make up for the true costs of what I have to invest into integrating and being a successful person with a disability. So I want to look at what the research says. I want to look at direct costs, indirect costs, give you some examples from my own life, and paint a picture of what it's actually like trying to live with a disability. Most experts and researchers would probably agree that having a disability costs money. You are going to have an added expense over an able-bodied person, but estimates on how much it actually costs vary widely. I have seen numbers as low as $500 per year and as high as over $10,000 per year. So why are those numbers so different? I think there are many factors that play into those numbers being what they are, and it depends on where you are. Different countries will have different social programs, may have different socioeconomic statuses, may have different levels of development, may have different levels of resource availability, and everyone's disability is going to be different, so is going to require different interventions. If you use blindness as an example, the way it affects somebody in Canada is going to be different from the way it affects somebody in the UK, China, India, or somewhere else. So how can we attempt to measure these costs and what it actually takes to live with a disability? I think a good place to start is with both direct and indirect costs. Direct costs are things that directly impact the person with a disability. Those are usually things like goods and services. So if somebody needs a care attendant, that's a direct cost. If somebody needs mobility equipment like a wheelchair or a white cane, that's a direct cost. If somebody needs to buy specific medication for their disability because they have a chronic illness component to it, that's a direct cost. If somebody needs home modifications, that's a direct cost. Indirect costs are a little bit harder to measure because they aren't as concrete as direct costs. It might mean inaccessibility, might be something like barriers to employment, might mean lost income. There's a lot of factors that play into that. Let's look at direct costs first. When you are buying a good or a service, there's usually a price. There's usually what we call an MSRP, or a manufacturer suggested retail price. That costs more than what it costs to actually produce the item because it helps pay for shipping and handling. It helps pay the wages of the people who are selling the product. It covers all of those costs between when it was produced and when it gets to you. Something I have noticed in the disability community more so than any other niche community I am a part of is that the markup seems to be significantly higher on items marked for disability rather than general purpose items. And I know it goes beyond a markup that's reasonable. And I know that people in the disability community are a smaller market, that maybe it needs to be a little more expensive to help cover the cost because you can't mass produce something, but it goes beyond that, and I'll share a couple of examples with you. Let's use wheelchairs as an example. There are many wheelchairs out there for many different functions, something that I wasn't as aware of before my journey into getting my own wheelchair a few years ago. When I started, I thought I could pick any wheelchair and it was going to serve my function and it was going to be just fine. I didn't even know wheelchairs came in different sizes. When it comes to wheelchairs, there are two main types. There's what you call transport chairs, which are relatively inexpensive, they're mass-made, they work in a pinch, they'll get you from point A to B, but they aren't very ergonomic, and you have custom-built super light chairs. And there's a bit of a spectrum there, so there is everything from very inexpensive to very, very expensive, but if you're using a wheelchair for mobility, you can't get the $100 chair because it's going to destroy you. A $100 chair is not going to serve you well because it's not going to maintain proper ergonomics, it's not going to support your shoulders, it's not going to allow you to push efficiently, it's going to take a lot more effort, they're a lot heavier, it's tougher to transport. So there's a lot of reasons why you would want a higher end or custom fitted chair. There's a big difference between a $100 cost and a $7,000+ cost, which is what most custom made chairs cost. Not only that, but if you are a more regular or full-time wheelchair user, wheelchairs don't last forever. It's not you buy one and you have it for life. They need to be replaced about every 5 years. So that's $7,000 every 5 years. Not only that, but you have the maintenance for your chair, something that you wouldn't need if you were on 2 legs and walking. You need to replace the tires, the tubes, the nuts, the bolts, the screws. Anything that might be a moving part is liable to wear and to break. So eventually, you're just going to have to trash the whole thing and get an entirely new chair. When I first heard that, I thought that was insane. But having used wheelchairs now, I understand there are a lot of stresses that go on that chair that you wouldn't think of if you weren't sitting in one and using it. If you had additional challenges with pushing, maybe you didn't have the upper body strength or you had other disabilities that prevent you from pushing yourself, you might need a power chair. And those start at about $20,000. I do want to interrupt myself briefly and say that I have now found power chairs starting around $5,000, but that is definitely not what I was quoted when I was looking at power chairs for myself. Yes, they make light chairs, but they aren't meant for everyday use. So you're looking at items that are becoming more and more and more expensive. For my own function, because I have to use a guide dog in a wheelchair at times, I needed something that was going to be powered, but I didn't want a power chair. So my option is something called a power assist device. A power assist device powers the wheels on your wheelchair. Mine has a joystick, so it can help you move as though it was a power chair without the weight and the challenge of having a power chair. Unfortunately, this is where you start really interacting with a lot of predatory business practices. When I started looking into power assist devices, I really wanted to know the nuts and bolts of where it was coming from, how much it cost, and the power assist devices that I was presented with, there were 2 options that would meet my need, were $9,000 and $11,000. That's on top of the $7,000+ I was going to need to spend on my chair. I don't know many people who have $20,000 sitting around, and in my case, I didn't have medical insurance that was going to cover the cost of my wheelchair. So I was having to make decisions between I could get a tool that I needed, but I couldn't afford the tool to help me integrate fully and use it independently. And that feeling sucks. It got to the point that I decided I needed to make my own power assist device. I was going to build it from scraps on Amazon. I was going to beg, borrow, and steal until I created something that I could use for my own purposes. Thankfully, during this time, my dad's partner reached out to the manufacturer of one of the wheelchair power assist devices that I was looking at and asked if they could buy directly from the manufacturer. What I found out nearly made me sick. The manufacturer had no problem selling to my dad's partner, thought it would be no problem, were very interested in getting me the device. Their cost, $1,500. Their MSRP, or suggested retail price, $3,000. I was being quoted $9,000. That is 3 times higher than what the MSRP is supposed to be. When I addressed this with the rep I was working with, he said this was not uncommon. It was not unusual to see prices that high compared to what they should be selling for. The fact that this is a commonplace practice speaks to the discriminatory ideas that we have. We can produce devices, we can sell them for a lot cheaper than we're selling them, but the bottom line is what's getting in the way. That made me so upset because the difference between even $3,000 and $9,000 is massive. Buying this device from the manufacturer directly, by the time I dealt with shipping, import costs, and getting it to my door, it cost me a grand total of $1,700. That's still a $1,200 commission somebody could make on that product. I don't understand how anyone can sleep at night selling it for what they were advertising it for. The fact that many products, especially in the disability community, have to go through dealers, have to go through reps, have to go through these middle parties is where all of this money comes from, and it makes me sick. These types of goods and services are not optional luxuries for people. Because they are so life-changing, retailers think that people with disabilities are going to pay anything to gain that freedom and independence. And in many cases, they are correct, but it still doesn't make it morally right. Let's look at another example. Producing Braille. You might be able to buy a set of Bic pens for $9. You can buy a pack of pencils for 50 cents. My cheapest option to produce Braille is going to be about $15. It's a slate and a stylus, and that is the cheapest option I know. While some people are really efficient at using a slate and stylus, I'm not one of them. It's something I use for very quick notes. I can't write an entire page on a slate and stylus. It will take me too long, it'll be frustrating, and it will hurt my wrists. A slate and stylus isn't going to cut it for my needs. The next step up is going to be something like a Perkins Brailler. A Perkins Brailler, put your guesses in now for how much that costs. I'll tell you that a vintage typewriter, which nobody uses anymore, is going to run you $300–400. A Perkins Brailler is going to run you over $1,200. That's not even mentioning paper. You can buy a pack of 200 sheets of paper for $25. You can probably get it cheaper when it's back to school time. For me, 250 sheets of paper is $44. Not to mention the fact that I'm going to go through paper about 3 times as fast as you do because Braille takes up a lot of space. So we can already see that the cost comparison here is significantly divergent. If I needed to produce a lot of Braille, I'm going to need to get myself an embosser. How much does your printer cost? I found one for $88. Full color, lovely, cheap little printer. My embosser ran me over $6,000. And I do have to produce a lot of Braille. I have to do a lot of copy editing. I have to check and transcribe a lot of materials. So having an embosser is integral for me being able to do my work. And if you want to go to the highest model still of producing Braille, you can go to something like a Braille display or a Braille note taker. Think of a Braille note taker like a miniature Braille computer. A Braille display might have some note taker abilities. Mine does. What it does well is it's going to take printed information that you're going to have on your computer screen and turn it into Braille. These devices are insanely expensive, and they can run you anywhere from a few $1,000s up to $10,000, $12,000. It's a lot of money. If you need to take notes in a meeting without being distracted and having to listen to a screen reader in one ear, a Braille note taker or a Braille display with note-taking capabilities is going to be integral to your work. And there's a lot of reasons you might need one or all of these devices. If you're in the workspace, you're going to need adaptions for your computer. If you're low vision, you might need specialized magnifiers like zoom text. If you're not into the Windows world, Mac has some built in, but Mac computers are inherently more expensive. And if you're using a screen reader, you're going to need extra modifications to that computer, including screen reading software. Sure, there's free options available, but if you want the one with all the bells and whistles, it's going to run you about $1,300. At least that's what my copy of JAWS cost. I asked to see if I could do the annual version for $90. That's not available where I live, or at least that's what I was told. So there goes another $1,300 just for me to be able to interact with my computer in a meaningful way. Oh, and don't forget that because screen readers are pretty RAM and memory intensive, you're going to probably need to not get the base model of computer if you're running a Windows machine. You're going to need to kind of upgrade that. So there's an extra few dollars on top of whatever your average word processing individual would need. And when it comes to adaptive equipment, like technology, it doesn't last forever. It needs replacing. I had a beautiful Braille display that I was using, worked wonderfully up until I did a software update, and then all of a sudden, it no longer functioned. I was ready to use that thing for the next 20 years. Instead, I had to buy a new $4,000 device. And then on top of that, you've got your expenses. If you have a guide dog, you've got all of their care expenses, vet bills, food, toys, everything that goes along with that. Believe me, I'm not complaining. I love my guide dog. She's saved my life more than anything, but it is an incredible expense. Even if you don't have a guide dog, you have to get new canes, new cane tips. There's added expenses there too. You might need adaptive kitchen equipment. You might need a talking scale, a talking thermometer, a talking blood pressure cuff. All of these things are going to cost more than your average run-of-the-mill item. Many of these you are going to need to leave your house, get a job, participate in society. These are not optional. In many cases, these are what separates people from getting jobs and not having any opportunities. In my case, being blind, having physical disabilities is expensive. It costs me many thousands of dollars every single year. I have been incredibly fortunate. I am lucky enough to live in a country where there are benefits, where there are programs, where there are things available to help mediate some of those costs. I have had to buy a lot of things out of pocket. I have had to beg, borrow, and scrimp so hard to get certain pieces of equipment that have made a tremendous impact on my life. I am lucky enough that I have these tools. I know these tools exist. I have been able to use them and integrate them in my life in a way that makes my life functional. But not many people have access to the things that I have access to. And my disability has been a tremendous financial strain for most of my life. I know that the things that I have been able to access, many people, even in the US, would never have access to because of the expense. It doesn't matter how good your health insurance is, they're probably not going to cover a Perkins Brailler. And we shouldn't have to rely on charities to meet our basic needs. It doesn't surprise me that the unemployment rate among the blind and visually impaired community is over 70% in most of the world. Because for us to succeed, we need these expensive adaptations. We need to be given training to use these tools. And that training and those tools are very hard to come by for most people. We shouldn't need to rely on charity to try and live a functional life. I believe that accessibility is a right, not a privilege. And I think we need to talk about this kind of thing more because there is a tax to being disabled. I've talked long enough, I don't even think we have time to talk about all of the indirect costs. How often I can't access the same information everyone else can. How inaccessible spaces are. How many times I've been turned down for jobs only for it to be given to the person after me. How there's blatant discrimination that's preventing me from being an active member of society. How it can take me twice as long to do something because there is no accessibility solution. How I've had to create my own opportunities because I didn't have the same access as everyone else to school programs, to extracurriculars, to anything that would enrich my life. We don't have time to talk about how at one place where I was employed, I was making half of what my coworkers were making, and when I tried to address it, they told me the burden fell on me. Even though there were government programs put in place to help mediate those costs, I could go on forever. The direct and indirect costs are immeasurable. And while my disability may incur more costs than others, there is no disability that does not cost people more. We are oftentimes forgotten, overlooked. We are the largest minority on planet Earth. 1 in 8 people is disabled, and we live in a world where people are becoming disabled every single day. We need to be aware of these costs. We need to understand these costs. We need to do research. We need to make more programs available for people who might benefit from them. We need to subsidize the costs of adaptive equipment and medical equipment. We need to work on equity and accessibility because whether you have a disability today or not, you don't know what tomorrow holds. And certainly within your lifetime, you will know somebody who will be. So if we deal with these problems now, if we make positive strides to change things, everybody wins. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.